Every single day in school, every American child in public education is required to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, placing their hand over their heart and reciting it to the American flag. When I say this to an American audience, there is no recoil, there is no shock, there is no horror. This is just what we do. But when I moved to the UK, suddenly I saw how other people might view this tradition as creepy, as culty, as potentially brainwashing. And it's this fascinating difference in how America perceives itself and its patriotism, or nationalism, as we'll get into in a minute, versus how the Brits I know go about expressing their love and loyalty to their country that's got me thinking. If you want answers regarding certain political movements, government decisions, or overall chaos that America brings upon itself, maybe the answer isn't in who voted for who. Maybe it's not in the two-party system. Maybe it's in the classrooms of 5-year-olds who know the Pledge of Allegiance better than their own address. First, let's do a quick rundown on how a love, loyalty, or obsession with one's country is expressed in the USA versus the UK before we dive into how an aggressive patriotism turned nationalism is potentially the seedy underbelly of the American system. In the USA, the following things are extremely common. Having an American flag outside your home, American flags outside schools and businesses, wearing red, white, and blue on patriotic holidays like the 4th of July, but also a lot of times just in general, having shirts that have the American flag on it, saying the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in school, standing to listen to the national anthem every morning in school, playing the national anthem before sporting games, having multiple national songs that every kid knows, and I mean multiple. If you were to ask me to name them off the top of my head, I'd keep you here for hours. I can recite to you My Country 'Tis of Thee, You're a Grand Old Flag, Proud to be an American. There is no shortage here. In the UK, it's a slightly different story here from the jump, because there is the fact that the UK is made up of 4 countries, so we have the national pride, i.e. go Team GB when it comes to the Olympics, but then you have country-specific pride, so Scottish flags in tradition, or trying to keep the Welsh language going by teaching it to your children. Patriotism within the UK is often expressed when it comes to sport. The England flags only come out really when England is doing well in a worldwide sporting event, typically football. Perhaps people will fly the Union Jack in times of national crisis, i.e. a pandemic, or during a Jubilee event. What is decidedly absent here is endless national songs, any sort of Pledge of Allegiance in schools, or flags being flown just in day-to-day life outside people's homes. And there is history and context here. For example, the English flag, the St. George's flag, was associated with far-right groups starting in the 1970s, so the nuances of this topic are more complex than a short video, but the main point still stands. But does this mean that Brits aren't patriotic? They're certainly not known for it, but I'd argue that actually in some definitions of patriotism, Brits are patriotic. It's just that Americans are something else entirely. Patriotism means a devoted love, support, and defense of one's country, and if you get any Brit talking about what they love about the UK, you'll often come across these ideals. From the NHS to Britain's incredible contributions to society when it comes to invention and technology, to the gorgeous countryside, I do get the impression here that many are patriotic, but patriotic in a sense of a love for the place they were born and desire for it to thrive. Of course, especially in England, they might understate it, and you won't necessarily know what they mean if you're not from here, because they'll also be the first ones talking the country down. But when you read between the lines and learn how Brits actually communicate, my impression is that many do feel a support towards the UK. Again, this is a complex topic because of differing cultural values and how we express that, and I would argue that some Brits would say they don't necessarily feel comfortable being proud to be British, because pride is something you feel in something you've accomplished, when it was sheer coincidence that they were born British. But after living through the pandemic in the UK, regardless of what the government was up to, you couldn't convince me that British people aren't patriotic in the sense that they're willing to band together far more than some other countries are for the greater good of each other and the country's resources. And to me, that is patriotic. Now, in America, many people are patriotic, of course, with a similar affinity for the US and a peaceful sense that still seeks to exist within the greater makeup of the globe in a tolerant way. But what most Americans would consider patriotic could actually be defined as nationalism. And this has a more negative connotation and is what is associated with some of the most horrific acts in the history of the world. Nationalism, by definition, is the policy or doctrine of asserting the interests of one's own nation viewed as separate from the interests of other nations or the common interests of all nations, i.e., America first. America only. Nationalism is not just saying, I love America and am proud to be from here. It's often saying, America is the best country in the entire world, better than all of the other countries, and we are only interested in what serves America. And I'm not here to discuss political arguments. There's definitely something to be said for wanting your own home and people to prosper. I think every country wants that for their population, and there are always hard lines that you have to draw on how much you prioritize your own country versus helping other nations or being involved in global agreements. But nationalism can be extremely dangerous in two main ways. Firstly, because it does not accept the fact that we coexist on the planet with billions of other people who do not live in our country. When you aggressively put your country first, above and beyond working with others and working together with other countries to make the world a better place, you can come across as very narrow-minded and isolationist and selfish. But more importantly than how you're perceived, nationalism can be weaponized and easily used by corrupt people in power to persuade and get people to believe in dangerous ideologies. There is a reason that overall the level of nationalism in Europe declined after World War II, because people saw just how easy it was for somebody who preyed on German nationalism to commit the unthinkable, and with support as well. Someone who is simply patriotic, who pulls out the flag at the football game and generally loves their country but isn't overzealous, is going to be harder to persuade of any particular ideology than someone who has grown up reciting a pledge every day to a flag, who is surrounded by an idea that your country is the greatest and is conditioned to not question this. And again, let's bring some nuance into this, because I'm not saying, oh, flags are bad. I've seen plenty of episodes of Bondi Rescue, which is a really interesting show about lifeguards on Bondi Beach in Australia, to know that Australians also like a bit of flag waving, particularly on Australia Day, or maybe fashioned into shirts, hats, etc., to show off their love for their country. I'm not criticizing or putting forward the idea that Americans are wrong for loving their country. I'm American and consider that my first identifier when asked about my nationality, despite having a British passport and living here. I love a lot of things about America. What I am saying though is that because of all the factors combined, American patriotism can turn easily into nationalism, which can lead to darker ideologies and create a problem quite quickly for America itself and the rest of the world. It's like being British, to bring us back to our comparison and contrast, having lived in the UK for over 10 years. Being British is something that you are, but being American, that's something you do. And if you don't wave the flag, if you don't say the pledge, well, then you're seen as not being patriotic, which is perhaps one of the worst things you could be seen as in certain parts of the US. Being un-American is worse than being labeled as mean or cruel or stupid, and so that's part of the problem. When the highest moral standing you can reach is one related to how much you say you love your country, it leaves room for the bullies to not look as bad, because it doesn't really matter if they're not kind or compassionate when that's not the measure of morality that many are using. In school, I remember one of my classmates refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and he was punished for it by missing recess. Many Americans would tell you that this is because it is considered disrespectful to the people who have served the country and fought for its freedom. But Britain also places emphasis on respect for its veterans and respect for the people who did fight for the UK during many wars. This place is practically filled with memorials and commemorations. And yet, many Brits would give the Pledge of Allegiance a side eye. So it's clearly possible to show respect in other ways. I guess my main point is, do not underestimate the importance that Americans place on doing acts of patriotism. And in some ways, it makes sense as to how they got there. America doesn't have a long history. It doesn't have a shared religion. It doesn't have long traditions or lots of shared bloodlines. Most Americans have only one thing in common: being American. The entirety of the country and the immigration here was founded on the desire to be American, to buy into the idea of the American dream or the better life. From the Puritans to the immigration waves that would come later, being American is seen ideologically within the country as a huge privilege. And on top of that, in a nation of immigrants, there is an idea that you have to start building that shared experience in order to build the nation. Many countries within Europe have not had to do that. But to form a cohesive union within the nations, Americans believed that they needed to get people identifying as being American, not where their parents came from. So you can see the roots of it in many ways. It's just that the intensity of this mission never really slowed down. And it's this outlook that separates what happens in America versus other countries countries who are also filled with people who do love their country and have a fondness for it. Patriotism can be quite a wholesome thing. It's the pride you feel when your country walks in at the Olympic Games and you want your athletes to succeed on the world stage. But nationalism, which is far more common in America, is a much darker thing that can lead entire nations into chaos and destruction because they're conditioned to follow. And because there's this underlying idea that they deserve to do exactly what they want without regard to other people on the planet because they come first. And to be clear, nationalistic parties have risen in other countries around the world. It's just that the scale of how it happens in America is much different right now, rather than fringe groups or a small percentage of the population. And other countries also have their own practices that many in Europe might find disturbing. Based on my research, Mexican schools do a flag ceremony every Monday, and it was popular in Brazil to sing the national anthem in school from at least the 70s to the 90s. But I would argue that we notice it more with the US because of its status as a world power. There is no denying, regardless of whether Americans feel like boasting about it or not, America definitely has an undeniable widespread influence and a dominant position in the world when it comes to financial markets, military, and political power. But the saying is that with great power comes great responsibility, not just to America and to its flag, but in my opinion, to the world at large. But unfortunately, I'm not running the country, and I'm actually not old enough to be president yet, so you'll have to give me some time. As always, I hope you learned a little something that might explain world events, and comment with your thoughts down below. Let's start the discussion. Do you feel patriotic? Let us know, and which country are you from? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.